Is photobiomodulation new? In this episode, a 3-part series, David Melone and I dive into his 40 years of developing and manufacturing light therapy devices.
What if I told you you could change your body simply by shining a light on it? Light in the visible spectrum. Spectrum visible is just another fancy way of saying light that we can see. By shining a light on the body, we can change the body. We can actually modify it. We can enhance it. We can increase circulation, decrease pain. Light therapy has been proven and shown to help with brain function, help with healing, help recovering from wounds.
And on and on. I mean, collagen production. Because what light therapy is doing is, when we're talking about photobiomodulation and putting the light against the skin or whatever it is, as in the pads, actually the mechanism of action is that nitric oxide is increased. And nitric oxide is a gas, and that gas is, they just discovered, only in 1998 what that gas did. And it increases circulation and decreases pain and inflammation. So every organ and system of the body, right, is going to benefit from the increase in circulation, getting more oxygen. And so we know physiologically, if we increased nitric oxide production, increase circulation, we're decreasing pain and inflammation. But there's also all kinds of things that benefit. Increased collagen production, so we like it for anti-aging. Creates an unfriendly environment for pathogens. It stimulates the release of osteoblasts, so it's great for the bones healing. Also stimulates angiogenesis, so the regrowth of tissue, and on and on and on. So I know, as the manufacturer of InLight Therapy products for decades, you've seen it all.
I have. We're hearing a lot about what a lot of people ask me questions about a new therapy, right? And this is called photobiomodulation. Photo being light, bio being life, and modulation being change. So what we're saying is that with light, we can change the body, right? So this is new. People are hearing about it. They're asking about it, but is it really new?
No.
What's new is the title, right? It is now that it is mainstream, now that doctors are using it, now that it's research papers and everything. I think, around 10,000 articles on PubMed about?
Yes, some amazing amount, thousands.
So we know it, and a lot of you may have heard of this as LED light therapy, or simply light therapy. And if you go way back, it would be LLLT, low laser light therapy. But even then, you wonder, how long has this been around? How long has people been using this kind of thing? Well, back in the 60s, one of the first doctors was trying to see if he could use a laser to treat cancer, to treat tumors. And he found, now this was a red laser, and those red lasers back then were generally like a ruby laser. It could have been a helium neon laser. It would have been a cold laser, not a hot laser. We're not trying to burn. We're just trying to deliver the light, right? And he found, using that what it did do is it stimulated the hair growth, and it helped accelerate the healing. So that's kind of where we start. And this is back in the 60s. Now, what is light? Let's talk about light for a second. So light is, light, we see it as white light, right? But when we see a rainbow, we see all the colors of the light. So if you were to take a prism and put a prism in front of light, then it separates it into the rainbow of colors with blue on one end, and you get red on the other end. So back in 1660 or so, Sir Isaac Newton took a prism and he separated light, which basically decoded the rainbow. No one knew what a rainbow was for the first time. So, and as he looks at it and studies it, that was great. It was a huge advance. But it was 140 years later when Sir William Herschel was looking at the light, and once again he's studying it. This is 1800, and he feels that the blue light is actually cooler than the red light, which, you know, he's wondering about that, so he's going to study it. He obviously he's a scientist. You know, scientist is really the observation of nature, and using that and recording it, and then applying theses to it, and then studying those with experimentation, right? So it's just looking at things, seeing it, and then thinking about it, and then doing little experiments. So he took 3 thermometers, right? He put one in the blue, he put one in the red, and he put the other one on the other side of the red. And he could have easily put it on the other side of the blue. I'm assuming he was right-handed. He put it on the other side of the red, right? And absolutely, he takes a look, and the blue is cooler. The red is warmer, and the control, the one outside of the light, is actually warmer than the others. And then he has a thought, well, then there must be a light, a wavelength of light, that we can't see. And he said that's got to be outside of red, which is above red, and he called it infrared. And that's where we know light, you know, infrared light exists. So we can't see it, just like as we can't see ultraviolet light, you know, animals, other things can. Had he had it on the other side, we probably would have discovered ultraviolet light. Right. You know, and there's probably more research about ultraviolet light, but, you know, happy accident. Now we have that. So now let's fast forward, and in 1985, well, first of all, Dr. Paul Noget from France. Right. In the 60s, he was studying auricular therapy, and auricular is in the ear. Right. Okay. He was trying to, he wanted to make a change in the body by treating acupuncture points in the ear that corresponds with other part of the body. And he was specifically trying to remove lower back pain, and he was targeting a little spot in the ear. He discovered that if you look at the ear, it actually looks like an upside down fetus, and the spots on that fetus actually correspond to the spots on the body on the back, right? So now we've got Mr. Dan Paris, mentor of mine, good friend. Dan he was making devices for auricular acupuncture. So he was putting a needle in that point, and then he was connecting it to an electrode, and he was putting an electron through it, a little electrical current, okay? Having great results with it. But then the FDA came through, and acupuncture needles were not cleared for human use at the time, right? They were still experimental. They hadn't been legalized. So legally, he can't do this at this point. So he decides, he has the thought, if I can't use an electron, maybe I could use a photon. And that's really it. The question I get asked all the time is how did you make that leap? Well, I didn't make that leap at all. Right. Dan made that leap, right? Right. So then in 1983, he started manufacturing some of the first devices. He applies for a patent in 1983. In 1985, he is granted the first U.S. patent that I know of for infrared light therapy to treat animals and humans. So before we go on, I know what a photon is, and you know what a photon is, but maybe our audience doesn't. So could you? So a photon is a particle of light. Right? It could be either a particle or a wave. You know, when you think of the energy from the sun, that's energy, that's a wave coming down. But it's actually, there's no mass to a photon. It's just the light that we see. It has the duality to be either particle or wave. You know, there's some controversy on that, but right. Go ahead. When we did a podcast with Marcy about that, she did go into the research and how they determine, is it a particle, is it a wave? Well, it's both. Yeah, I find it fascinating because when we're talking about changing the body by just using light, right? So it's a wave when it hits, and then the duality, then the particle, then it transfers, then it becomes a particle, right? Becomes a part of you, actually. And that's the thing that changes you, okay? So you were telling the story about how you got to this point with the different people along the way. And so the last guy. So now we are, it's 1985, Dan Paris. Yeah. He just has the first U.S. patent. Dan got a lot of his electronic training in the military. As a small child, Dan had a television shop and a television repair and sales shop, and I would play in the back of his shop. I knew him from a child. And I joined the military. And in 1985, I got out of the Marine Corps. I was still in the reserves. I'm out of the Marine Corps. And I had been through the Marine Corps Communication Electronics School studying ground radio repair. So I had the same background that he had in electronics. And he calls me up. I was invited into this. I'd never heard about it. And he called me up and he said, "Would you like a job?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not doing anything else." So I go to work for Dan. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. And that was the beginning of what is now a 40-year career in the studying, the designing, the manufacturing, the distribution of LED light therapy products. And I know now the fancy name is photobiomodulation.
Right.
It's always going to be LED light therapy to me, right? You know, even though now that it is mainstream, it has been blessed, it has been given its proper name.
Right. Yeah, and the industry wants us to use that, so we're all talking about the same thing. And so generally, so for people who maybe they don't know about photobiomodulation or red light therapy or LED light therapy or any of it, what makes it light therapy? I mean, because obviously we're under lights in the studio right now.
Right, and we are. We're under lights all the time.
Right.
The sun has all the spectrum of light. It actually has, much further on both sides. So yes. Now, I think why it's so effective and how it works at this point is we're also light deficient. We're inside these days. We wear more clothing. We have artificial light. So I think we're light deprived. I think we're light deficient. What I've noticed is when I first started manufacturing and doing this, I think the effects were more subtle. Now, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, now that they've definitely improved. The first device that Dan manufactured was a single 1 milliwatt. It was a helium neon laser. So this is a cold laser. The tube is about this big. The only way back then, electronics, there was no way a laser is actually, so it's gas, helium neon. So there's no way to pulse that and turn that on and off, right? So there's no way to deliver the frequencies that Dr. Noget has developed, right? And these frequencies that Dr. Noget developed are harmonics of the musical note D, right?
Okay.
So he used the bass frequency in 4 harmonics of 2, 4, 8, and 16, and then later he came back and used 2 subharmonics, and those were he actually named them A, B, C, D, and then E, and then he went back and added the 2 subharmonics as F and G. So. Most people have now have numbered it, and they start at the bottom instead of using the letters. So they usually start as number 1 is the lowest frequency, and that's going to be about 73 hertz, and number 7 is the highest frequency, and that is around 4,672 hertz. A hertz is actually cycles per second, and so even though light is a wave, right? This hertz is we're turning this thing on and off. So we literally are blinking it, right, at E at 4,672 times per second. Now, you can't see that. Later we'll be having some lights on, and you will not be able to see the pulsation of it, okay? But it's there.
It's so fast.
Still fast. Now, if we go down to 72, you still can't see that. If we were to take that down to below 50 hertz or below 40 hertz, then you would see that strobe lighting effect.
Right.
Right? So the reason that most inflorescent bulbs are 60 cycles is we can't see that strobing. Okay. So we keep it above that. And another interesting thing now is we're going back 40 years, but now when you go forward, almost every light therapy company is using these no-shave frequencies. And I don't think any of them really understand why. And I guarantee you most people have no idea the history of it.
Right.
Dan could have he could have started just with light therapy and not with the auricular therapy. And he could have put any wavelength or any frequency he wanted into it, right? It could have been 50, 100, whatever. But he went with the musical notes. He went with the research done by Dr. Noget. And that's where we have the Noget frequencies. And I find it's also very funny to me too, because there's a discrepancy about it. Some people say, well, the true frequencies, instead of E being 4672, it should be 4684. Okay. And what Dan did was he dropped off, he just did 292 and he multiplied up. It's actually 292.665 cycles per second.
Right.
But what I know is this: it really makes no difference. And I say that because that's 40 years of observation.
Okay.
We've tried both. Once we found out that mistake was made, or maybe it wasn't a mistake, but once that had happened, when we found out that there was another wavelength, I actually tuned the devices to that, and I didn't see any additional increase in efficacy. So it's not really about the individual frequencies. So when we started, go back, we had a 1 milliwatt LED. We've got this laser tube. He puts it in a large device, in a large box. Back then, there were plastic boxes, plastic cases. They really didn't exist. This would have been metal and wood, quite heavy. The only way to break and to put a frequency in it, he's actually breaking the beam of light, and he's using that with a motor and a wheel that he times, right? So you imagine a wheel that's just half, so it's on half the time and it's off half the time. So we call that a 50% duty cycle. So this was his device. He then puts it on a stand, and he's giving it to or selling it to acupuncturists. Right, and then they're using
That's the connection with the auricular acupuncture,
with the auricular acupuncture
and the eye.
Exactly. So he's taking this, right, and they're putting it on a stand, and he's shining it into the ear on the acupuncture point. And at some point, he gets contacted by a group of equine acupuncturists, and I didn't know that was a thing, right? And once again, you couldn't use acupuncture on equines as well. So you needed to be able to use another modality. You could no longer use the electron, he's using a photon.
Okay.
So he makes a portable device. And this device only weighs about 27 pounds. It's about this big and this big and this big, right? Big old heavy thing. And what they're doing is they're actually holding it and they're shining this at the horse. And now they're actually trying to treat the acupuncture points all over the horse, okay? One at a time. They're holding it.
With a big beam of light shining on a...
This beam of light is very, very tiny, okay?
So
but the
it's
device,
a big device
is huge.
but the point is acting like a needle, but with light.
Right. It's so this was a laser, and a laser is simply a collimated beam of light. So
Not pulsing.
not pulsing. A laser is just a laser, right? So collimated means that the photons and the light is coming off straight, right? So it's coming off the straight point, it's hitting it, and it's, as soon as it hits the skin of the animal, it's diffused. But at this point, it's a laser. There really weren't LEDs at this point. And then one day, the way he tells the story, he hears about a veterinarian, and the veterinarian's at a racetrack, when a horse goes off track, runs into a barbed wire fence, and has a huge wound. I mean, so bad that the veterinarian comes by, and the veterinarian thinks we're going to have to put the horse down, right? The other acupuncturist, he is taking this device and he starts to bathe the area. He just starts to circle this area. And this wound is huge, right? So much so that, they didn't think the horse would ever be able to recover. And this was not an inexpensive horse. This is a race horse.
Yeah.
Well, the veterinarian comes by and he looks at it and he says, a couple hours later, and he says, he tells him, he says, look, I'll come back in a few hours. I'll put the animal down. Okay, I've got to monitor the races. After the race, I'll come back and do it. The technician is still, he says, what if I try this? He says, go ahead. So he takes this device, and for 2 hours, he turns it manual, and he's just circling this wound with like a little pinpoint, like a laser pointer we would have today.
Right.
It's just a little pinpoint. It's going around this wound. I mean, what gave this man the idea to do it? I have no idea. But obviously, inspiration, right?
Right.
Divine inspiration.
And the great light.
Right.
Right.
So a couple hours later, the veterinarian comes in and he's like, I swear that horse looks better and that wound looks smaller, right? And he goes, let's just keep doing what you're doing. I'll come back at the end of the day and we'll see, So by the end of the day, he comes back and they do not have to put the horse down. The horse made a full recovery. Not only did a horse make a full recovery, that the area of the flesh that was ripped away, when it regrew, the hair regrew too. So it looked as if the wound had never happened.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. And what's so amazing to me about the whole story is because light therapy's only been in my life for 15, 16 years, but you've been doing this for 40 years.
I will start my 40th year in January of this year. 40 years. I was 20 years old. when Dan called me. Once again, I had no idea what this was about. I'm just a technician, you know. I don't really understand much about it. My first experience with it, I'd been there maybe 2 or 3 weeks, okay? And I still don't even know what we make. All I know is I'm assembling circuit boards, I'm testing.
Connecting some stuff.
That's what I'm doing. I'm testing and all this. And one of my things is when we're putting it in the housings, we need to deburr or clean off the holes, right? And I'm doing that with a X-Acto knife razor blade. And I slip. And when I slip, I mean, I don't know if you can still see it. The scar's still there.
A little bit.
It cut from here to here, and it was very, very deep, right? The kind where you would need stitches. And Dan comes up and he goes, "You don't need stitches." He's like, "Take this," and he had a little wand pen device at the time that plugged into the large machine. Now at this point it has progressed. It was in the late 70s where, you know, he had the concept and where he's moving it forward. Now it's moved and he's got a device. It's 1985 and he's got a patent. So at this point, even though the device is clunky, there's a probe and it's very mobile. So now instead of, because, you know, once they found out that it wasn't very ergonomic to be able to use a 27-pound device, right? So now they could treat these wounds with this little pen. So he hands it to me and he goes, "Just sit there and just do this." I'm 20 years old, you know. First of all, I'm like, my first thought is it going to burn it closed? You know, because he's telling me it's a laser, and I'm like, didn't do any of that. And I didn't believe it was going to work. I don't know that it did. I didn't actually, you know, the wound healed up. I did not get the stitches. It did leave a pretty good scar. That was my first experience.
Right.
And like I said, it was back in 1985.
That's amazing. And so it all started really with horses. I mean, this whole industry really started with that wounded horse.
It did. It did. I mean, that was, I think, the real breakthrough is instead of making a change in the body, once again, modulation, right? They were actually wound healing now. They were accelerating wound healing. And if you Google, you know, photobiomodulation, wound healing is very, very big.
It comes right up to the top of one of the benefits.
Yes. Wound
fracture healing, wound healing, neuropathy.
Accelerated healing, and now what? Anti-aging,
right.
Fantastic for the skin,
right.
Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, it's also great for hair growth, hair restoration. I think it has something to do with the increasing the overall health and changing the pigmentation. I mean, I know that I turned 60 in January, and I do not dye the hair. I mean, that's the natural color. Now I stared into a bank of these LEDs, these infrared LEDs that you cannot see this wavelength of light. Right. It was probably this far from my face for about 12 years, and my job for those 12 years was to tune the circuit boards that go in. So I had a bank of the panels, and I would plug them in and I would turn the device on and I would run each device for 30 minutes and test it through all its frequencies. And I did that 8 hours a day. And I did that 5 days a week. And I did that day in and day out, year in, year out. So you hear a lot of people saying infrared light could damage the eyes, other things like that. Well, maybe it can, maybe it can't. I feel like I'd be blind right now if it did, you know. Don't really know, you know, about that.
But your hair is its natural color.
Hair's a natural color. I need to start shining it on the beard, I guess. It's now progressed to the point where, you know, instead of a single LED, you know, move forward 40 years, we have a pad banks of LEDs.
And how did that leap happen? So you went from one little probe.
Right.
How did you make the leap?
Okay, well, the first thing that happened was infrared LEDs. So we're at a laser at one point, and the probe that I'm telling you about isn't even solid state at this point. This probe is actually a fiber optic cable that is transporting the light from the device to, you know, out an aperture that we're using. Now we fast forward back to where I come in 1985, and television remote controls had come out late in the 70s, early 80s, and they had invented a thing called a LED. Right? And this was an infrared LED, and it wasn't like the plastic LEDs we see now. This was actually a machined metal can. They're about the same size with a glass dome on it. Very, very expensive device.
I think I remember that.
So at this point, when you buy one, and I think they were $6,000 or $7,000 back then. Once those LEDs came out, he put them in the probe, and then he took a piece of hard durometer, that's hard thickness, hard rubber, and because it was flexible, right? Because the whole idea is the closer you can get this to the skin, right?
Yeah, that seems to be the magic.
That seems to be the magic, and I know we hear a lot now.
Right.
Right? I hear it all the time. I get asked the question, what do the big panels do that you stand, 2 feet away from? Well, I don't really know. I do know this, that the further away from the skin, the decrease in the efficacy, you really want that touching the skin. And another thing is, so this was a laser diode at the time, infrared laser, so it's collimated once again. So now we're putting 12 of them in a rubber pad that's 3 inches by 6 inches. Then we're having a vinyl cover with a clear vinyl cover sewn for it, and we're putting this all in it. And now we're going to take this pad and we're going to put that on the horse over the wound. And 2 of them come in a device. So we're going along, we're making those for years, not much innovation. Then one day, the density, we're only on the 2 outsides. They're about this far apart, but about 2 inches in the middle, when Dan says, why don't we put 3 rows of 5 instead of 2 rows of 6. So now we've started to answer your question. We've started to increase the density of the LEDs. We've started to increase the density of the pads. So we're going along, we're using these laser diodes, and one of the, I wasn't a veterinarian, it was someone that just very, very passionate about horses, wanted a device that could be portable, that you could wrap around a tendon, a hock, a knee, a cap, the neck, right? Area-specific targeted products. Well, at this point, there was no way to power those with LEDs had just come out. Small red plastic LEDs, very, very low output had come out. We couldn't power the infrared LEDs because they just required too much power. They wanted this to be cordless. You don't want a horse stepping on
right.
power cable.
It's going to spook.
That's it.
And it's going to ruin the...
And it could die.
Right.
I mean, you could electrocute the horse. They respond to very low outputs of electricity. It's very easy to injure them. They also respond to very low inputs of light. So Dan takes these little plastic LEDs, and we hand wire each one. So there's no circuit boards like this. I mean, they didn't have flexible circuitry. So what we would do is we would put a piece, and we started using a soft durometer neoprene, a substance we still use today in our pads. And so we would drop those LEDs in. They all have to be polarized, so you have to put positive to negative. I spent years just taking a wire, circling it around, soldering, going to the next one, and we find that the results are just absolutely fantastic. I mean, we had a huge growth spurt at this point, as we're making, maybe a few 20 systems a month. Now we're making hundreds of pads a month, getting up to hundreds and hundreds, selling multiple of them.
And this is in the late 80s, early 90s?
This is still late 80s. This may be right around early 90s, maybe 91, 92. We keep doing this for quite a while. And then Dan starts making a probe. We want something more intense. So not only are we making the pad that is spread out and we're trying to treat the big hock of the horse, right? Mm-hmm. We want something to treat acute injuries that has a lot more power than like a single diode has, okay? So he puts 30 of these into a circle, and then people have the question and people wonder, and these are going to be for a horse. So he uses the infrared. We can now use the infrared. So 30 infrared, but you can't really see it, and people don't believe it, and they don't trust it.
Because you can't see it with the naked eye, so it doesn't look like any light's coming out.
Exactly. So he decides that horses respond so well to this that he replaces 10 of the LEDs with red LEDs. So now we have 2 wavelengths of light. Now, up until now, the efficacy, how the device was used, we observed that you could use it for 2 weeks, and then the horse wouldn't get better, even a person. Now, at this point, humans are starting to use them as well.
They would get better for 2 weeks, and then it would drop off. Is that what you're saying?
They just wouldn't improve any further.
After the first couple of weeks.
After the first couple of weeks. So The theory was, well, the body's getting used to this treatment. So then, we thought, well, use 2 weeks, lay off a week. And so for years, the program was 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and then alternate 1 week on, 1 week off, 1 week on, 1 week off. And we do this for quite some time, Now we need to jump forward several years. Okay, so we're about 1998 or so, and now we're making these things. Now I am making these independently for human use. Dan stays in the equine market. He stayed in the equine market his entire life. Dan is still with us. Dan is in his late 80s. Wonderful man, We have stayed close friends and our entire lives, He's the father I would have picked. If I could have picked a father, I would have picked this man. So I'm making these for human use. I'm using the 7 Auger frequencies. Now, we've had a lot of anecdotal evidence, exactly, of what each frequency does. So we're sending these to doctors, and doctors are buying them, They reached out to us. We don't reach out to them. They find about these are your, what do you call them? These are your uptake on. These are the people that early responders, right? These are the ones that pick up technology early. These are open-minded MDs that are thinking that there's another way to heal and there's other things besides medicine, right? And this is the beginning of energy medicine as we know it, which wasn't a thing, right?
No.
Energy medicine didn't exist and nobody would have believed it. Most people didn't believe it, I can tell you that. I was considered by my own family crazy for the longest time.
You and me both.
Right?
Right.
I mean, it's like you do what? Right. You shine a little light and you stimulate. I remember my brother, heavy Oklahoma accent, and he'd always made fun of me for doing it, right? You still make those horse stimulators. And I was like, that's simplifying it, but okay. So he comes along and he's going, no doctor, David, wants to learn what these individual 7 frequencies do. They want to take the time for this. He said, can you make it cycle through all 7 frequencies? Well, at some point during this process, before we're at this point, microprocessors or microcontrollers had come out. So now before it was solid state electronics where every single component had a mission and it had a job to do, now we have software. So now we can put a chip on the board. And when he asked, it was like, it took me 15 minutes. I don't even think it took 15 minutes to rewrite the program to make it cycle through. And that was it. That was the biggest breakthrough so far that we've ever had in LED light therapy. For some reason now, the body no longer plateaus.
Since you cycled through all 7?
Since we're cycling through all 7 frequencies. In the past, they would, frequency, at this point, it's frequency 7, highest frequency. It was really good for decreasing pain. Right. Others were better for circulation. And that's how they're specifically used at this point. So when we started cycling through, I remember I said, I can do it, but I have no idea if it's going to work.
Right.
But that wasn't my job, right? My job is to manufacture the device for the scientists, for the experimenters that are actually going to figure out what it does. So
Right. And I know when I first, got my device, one of your devices, 15, 16 years ago, and learning about the Auger frequencies, we had the option, still have the option, to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or to put it on that cycling thing of the A setting where it's cycling through all of them. And I would have all these people that would say, well, use this specific setting 5 or 7 or whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute. Even as much of my life as I have spent learning about the human body, and I do have a doctorate in energy medicine, undergraduate degrees in health and physical education, I've been interested in the human body for decades. I thought, how do I know exactly which tissue I want to be affecting? I'm going to use A. So whenever, because I know it's cycling through all of that. And so I'm getting the benefit, or my client's getting the benefit from every one of those settings. So why not in a 20-minute session or whatever? Why not use the cycling ability?
And you're correct, and that is the way it's used 90% of the time. Now, you do have some people that really want to get in, right? And you might get, a small percentage increase by using a single frequency or using a combination of frequencies like that. And that's great. We love people like that actually want to take the time to do it. But most people are just going to cycle through.
Oh, yeah, that's me. I want the easy way. I just want the easy way. So now, having said that, so, yes, as far as I know, I have seen some of the other light therapy devices, and of course, we're for everything that helps anybody, and you are too. I mean, you're one of the original pioneers, obviously, you and Dan, for the photobiomodulation industry, and we've seen a lot of, offshoots of stuff, which is great as long as it works. Exactly. Right? As long as it works and doesn't harm anybody. And photobiomodulation is recently, in the last, 6 or 7 years, reclassified by the FDA as a general wellness modality because it's so safe and effective. Okay, right?
That's right. That is correct. And that, for me, that's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah. And we'll get into that conversation a little bit. But I want to go into but then you also use the solfeggio tones.
Exactly.
Right. So in one of your other channels. And so why did you decide to do that?
Once again, now we're going to fast forward another decade or so, and so we've got a device. It's using, you can pick 1 through 7, or you can pick cycling through all. Once again, I don't remember if it's a doctor or practitioner who comes to me and says, "Have you ever thought of using solfeggio? Could you explain solfeggio?"
Well, the musical tones. Right, and so the Gregorian chants, and that when we listen to them. And I believe it's based on 444 hertz. Mm-hmm. And again, you know a lot more about this than I. But for whatever reason, when we're listening to the chants and to the solfeggio tones, the cells really like it. Okay, and it's considered a very, very healing frequencies. It's not my area of expertise. That's how I understand it. But why did you decide to include that in one of your other channels?
All right. What is the definition of science?
Okay, I like this.
Right. Science is it's observing the natural world. It's then it's taking notes. It's experimenting. It's trying to prove what you're observing, right, is real. So what am I doing at this point? I'm a scientist at this point. What I'm basically doing is, if you ask me to do it, I'm like, well, let's try that. I mean, how do we know unless we experiment? So we're experimenting on this, and so Noge, solfeggio, some of them overlap. Some are almost identical. It's just a single wavelength. It's just a single frequency. I mean, of sound. Right. So, for me, there's no detriment, there's no harm. If Dan could have easily started with solfeggio, he started with, and if he had, Noge probably wouldn't be anywhere right now. I mean, it wouldn't have the notoriety that it certainly has at this point. So I'm like, well, let's give that a shot. And once again, right, it's, I give it, we get out to the practitioners, it's out to the doctors. They're the ones that are going to test it. They're the ones that find out what it does. Right. They give me positive results, so we keep it in there.
Yeah, and I mean, I love it. In our clinic, we use Light on Everybody. I use that most commonly. And because it seems to be so, well, it really doesn't seem to matter which setting you have it on, they're going to relax. Right. And that nitric oxide's flowing through the body, endorphins are being released, they're chill, they're relaxed. But I do feel like it's a deeper relaxation most often if we use that setting, the setting B. If someone has a very physical ailment, like they broke their leg, I'm more inclined to go to setting A. Whether or not that's just my preference and my own, thought about it. But some years ago, I'm a lyricist, so I was writing a song, and it ended up taking me a couple of years to actually finish it because I felt like it was being divinely inspired, and I'm not always listening. But as I was writing, I heard what I say is my angels from the light, could be my superconscious, whatever. If you really want this to be a healing song, you'll record this in 444 hertz, which is what we did. And even to this day, it's called Get Down on My Knees, and it's a song of gratitude. Get down on my knees to thank you Well, I get down on my knees to thank you, I thank you. I fall down on my knees to thank you, thank you. With so much gratitude for all the things you do, I need to thank you. I call out in the night, thank you, thank you. And in the morning light, I thank you, I thank you. With you it all feels right. Thank you, thank you. With love and gratitude for all the things you do, I need to thank you. You help me until I could see. You ask me to believe. Now I believe. I believe. So I get down on my knees to thank you, thank you. Well, I get down on my knees to thank you, I thank you. I fall down on my knees to thank you, thank you. There's so much I receive for who you are to me, I need to thank you. You inspire me, the fire in me, desiring. You ask me to believe. Yes, I believe. I receive. So I get down on my knees to thank you, thank you. Well, I get down on my knees to thank you, I thank you. I fall down on my knees to thank you, thank you. I love you, I want to thank you. Which is very high in vibration. We're going to talk all about that in a little bit, but even to this day, when I personally listen to the song, I feel better, okay? And I'm the one singing it and who wrote it. So I do think there's a lot of science behind both the Noge and the solfeggios, which is cool then because then you did channel C, which you put some of each of those.
Yeah, so channel C, we were, circulation. One of the number one things that photobiomodulation, LED light therapy does is increase circulation. And when you increase circulation, it has numerous positive effects that we can talk about on the body. We were using it for, at the time, it was a lot of doctors were using it for diabetic podiatric neuropathy. People that had lost feeling in their feet, right? And we were trying, lost the circulation in their feet, and then they lose the feeling in their feet. You know, the nerve endings start to die. When that happens, you can't feel your feet, you get a lot of pain. And the product was working quite well for this. A lot of doctors were using it for it. We wanted to know. We wanted to see, is there really an increase? Does it really matter? You know, what frequencies? Are some frequencies better than others? We don't know at this point, honestly, you know?
Right.
So we get the use of a Doppler scanner, and we test it on the foot, and it was very interesting. We did find specific frequencies that increased that overall circulation, not a huge amount, 5%, maybe 7%, still significant enough that we added the third channel, and it's basically the combination of the two, and that's it. And it also proved to me, right, that although, you know, the specific frequencies, you know, light is light, and you need that light, and it doesn't really matter on the specific frequencies, but you can enhance it, right, by dialing it in a little more, and that's what we did. So we now know that certain frequencies are going to be better than other frequencies, and still a lot of research to be done. I'm sure there's a lot of frequencies we haven't, you know, or combinations that haven't been tried. But now, as we said, there's like 10,000 articles. The research is there. There's enough people out doing it that these questions will be answered. But for me, they were answered, right? The difference. One wavelength of light helped.
Right.
Two wavelengths, far superior, right? Just having...
And when you're saying wavelengths, just as a reminder, colors.
Colors, that's it, colors. And honestly, I said two wavelengths. You know, it is two wavelengths, but it wasn't two colors. Infrared is not a color. We can't see it. The other one is a color. Right. And then, so we go along. So now we're using red, because red LEDs are available, and we're using infrared. And then at some point, blue comes out. Blue LEDs, right? And people are like, you're going to add blue LEDs? I'm like, no. I'm not going to add blue LEDs. I mean, red and infrared work. This has been proven to me. You know, I was probably a little arrogant in it. You know, I was like, you know, I've been there from the beginning. These are the colors that work.
Right. They're working. Don't mess with them.
And at some point, you know, I'm basically, you know, due to the questions, I'm almost forced to add it, right? I feel like that I need to, okay? So we add it. People have great results. I personally didn't know if it worked. I personally didn't feel, you know, didn't know that there was any difference. I felt like this, that infrared is the one that's penetrating, and the secondary color, which is a lot lower in output than the primary, which is infrared, which has more power. It was just kind of the carrier, and it just kind of helped. So I figured, well, red works, blue will work, anything will work. It wouldn't really affect it, wouldn't really make a change. And I had that opinion for quite some time until I'm talking to a woman that's calling me, telling me, basically she's saying the product has saved my life. She had horrible stomach issues. I don't remember if it was Crohn's, celiac, what it was, but it had gotten to the point where, you know, she couldn't work, couldn't do anything. Basically, she couldn't eat without having the bathroom right next door. I mean, it really had progressed. And I had suffered with some stomach issues, and she was telling me how much it helped. And I was like, I haven't really, you know, haven't noticed that myself. I said, you know, helps with wounds, helps with a lot of things, but I haven't noticed that. And she said, we're using the blue and the infrared. I'm like, no, I'm using the red and the infrared, you know? Right. So she says, try it. And I do. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. And that was for me another big eye-opener. It was a big moment. I'm like, it really does make a difference. So individual frequencies make a difference. Individual colors make a difference. So now we have still just scratched the surface.
Right. Just because we don't know everything that it does doesn't mean it's not doing a tremendous amount of things.
Exactly. Right.
We're finding out all the time. I know my daughter, one of the first experiences that I had, she was just little and had flu for 2.5 days. And I couldn't get a homeopathic in her. I couldn't get water in her. And I didn't even own a system at this time, but my colleague who had an office in my office had told me I could use hers. Mm-hmm. And so I finally asked Grace, do you want me to go get the lights? Because we had used them before. And she said yes. So I went to the office, came back, put the pad on her belly. Within 10 minutes, she sat up and said, I'm hungry. Do we have anything to eat?
Isn't that amazing?
If I hadn't seen that myself, I wouldn't have believed it. So I used to call myself the Doubting Thomas. I don't do that anymore because I had the thought, wow, well, maybe it just had run its course. So we got another opportunity with the flu about 6 months later. And so then I got to this time I didn't wait 2.5 days. Put it on her belly right away. And for her, it just had knocked it out.
May I ask you, what sold you on the lights? What convinced you that light worked?
Well, this colleague having her office in my, it was an academy for biofeedback. She had told me I could use her unit, but she also wanted to sell me one. And I was like, I do not need, I had a $20,000 biofeedback device and had all kind of other energy medicine devices. And I don't remember if I said or not, but my doctorate is in energy medicine. I didn't want to, I didn't need another toy, I didn't think. But I kept hearing her speakers come in and present about light therapy. And I thought I had everything I needed. Well, she kept having clients coming in talking about that anti-aging program or using it for anti-aging. And I thought, well, you know what? I am interested in that. So can we see, did you bring a face mask?
So this is the obviously way more advanced than the original devices we discussed. So here we go. So you can see the visible red LEDs. Can you see this? Okay. These are the infrared. So these are lit up, but you just can't see it. You and I know this. We're telling this for everybody
Between
else.
every row that you can see, there's a row you can't see.
You cannot see another device. There are devices where you can see it. Since this is pulsed at frequencies that you can hear, right? Some people can actually hear it. Yeah. I can't anymore. I could 20 years ago. Yeah, it's on all the time. This is only on half the time. Looks like this is on continually.
It does. It
right?
Looks like it, right?
But like I said, you're not seeing that frequency. You're not seeing that pulsing. So, we take this pad and then we wrap it around the skin, and we want this as close to we want this touching the skin, right? So, the difference, let's go back for a second. The difference between lasers and LEDs is, I said lasers were collimated, and for a long time I got a lot of criticism, right? The doctors, people that are using it said, it had to be low-level laser therapy, right?
Right.
And then it became more low-level light therapy. Dr. Pekka Pontonen, I believe was his name, had written a book about low-level laser therapy. Dan sends him a unit. They become friends. And at some point, he actually changes it to low-level light therapy. So people were kind of snobs about it, right? Has to be a laser. Well, the only difference is a photon, right? One is
a particle of light.
Particle of light. One is collimated, right? And these come off at a viewing angle. And now, once it hits the skin, it's not collimated, it's diffused, right? So we knew with an LED the same thing. Now it's very close, so it makes just a little dot. I don't know if you could see that on there, little circles. Yeah. But as we spread it out, the diffusion, right, you can see it covers the entire area. Now, in between these red lights, we've also got infrared. So we're bathing the entire area with light. So we knew that, well, first of all, laser diodes are very expensive. LEDs were becoming much more inexpensive. So you could buy a $5,000 laser device and have 4 diodes in it. Or you could buy a device for $2,000 and it have 100, and with much more output and much more coverage area. So now over time, right, now it's laser, it's LEDs. I mean, it really, some people might use an actual laser LED, right? But that's still just an LED. Right. The photon is created the same, it's just more collimated. So that doesn't matter. And that's, so that's when, we go to the pads. We also want them flexible. Some people do the rigid devices. With a rigid device, you're missing a lot, right. You're not getting it all.
There's
with this.
Still some obvious benefit, but yes. Not the same amount of release of nitric oxide and all that as if we can get that against the skin.
Right. And nitrous oxide I'd never heard of, at this point. It was a long time before we knew about nitric oxide. Could you talk, wasn't that like a huge breakthrough? Wasn't it a Nobel Prize?
Yes, it was only as recently as 1998 that 3 PhDs won the Nobel Prize for discovering what this gassing off effect was in the body. They knew that it was a gassing off effect. They didn't know what it did. And so what they discovered is it's nitric oxide, not nitrous oxide, which is the laughing gas we get at the dentist. but they now call nitric oxide the miracle molecule of the body, because in the presence of nitric oxide, there are so many physiological processes that are enhanced. And, number one is the increase in circulation. The increase in circulation and the decrease in pain and inflammation. It's it helps the cells with the ATP, so that's the powerhouse, the energy of the cells. And so we're getting more oxygen, we're getting more circulation, the nutrients are getting to the cell more efficiently, toxins are coming away from the cells more efficiently with the increase in circulation, decrease in pain, many, many, many other things. But that's initially what the FDA clearance was for pain and circulation. Now with our new classification of a general wellness device, we can say a whole lot more things because it's a device that does no harm, but we still have to save that conversation for a minute. Let me finish my story with how I came to it. So do we have a face mask that we can show? I was so interested in the anti-aging part that when nobody was in the office one day, I went over to her cubicle area and I said, well, I'm going to try it. So she told me I could use her device, so I'm going to do it. So I took the face mask, which normally is worn like that, and I was interested in the loose skin on my neck. So I, strapped this on like this and put the Velcro around the back and put pads everywhere else because there was 2 or 3 other pads. And so I did that. It was very relaxing. In 20 minutes, the system went off. And I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror and I'm like, well, I still have loose skin on my neck, I mean, I don't know what I thought was going to happen in one session, but I was like, I know that people, needed to do it repeatedly, but I wanted to see if I could see anything visually. So then I got in the car and went to lunch. The song comes on the radio and I start singing. And I had not been able to sing for 2 solid years. When I would try to sing anything, the notes would just not connect. They would skip. And I had this like grovel in my voice. And so I was like, oh my God, I can sing. What did I eat today? Even though I'd just done the light therapy, I was like, what did I drink today? I couldn't think of anything I had eaten differently because what you eat or what you drink can affect your singing voice. What did I eat? What did I drink? I couldn't think of anything. So for 4.5 days, I was so happy I could sing again. And it wasn't a big request. I just wanted to be able to sing my kids happy birthday and Santa Claus is coming to town or whatever. It wasn't that I've never been like a soloist or anything like that, but I do love to sing. And singing's very important to me. And I think singing's very important in the family and in our lives, as music is. And so in the afternoon of day 4.5, the grovel came back in my voice. And you can still hear it a little bit in my voice right now, but I can sing. It doesn't keep me from being able to carry a tune. I was so, the stupid thing, like getting mad at God, like as God reached down and grabbed my voice. Because I was mad about it. Like, why did you give me my singing voice back if you're just going to take it back? I mean, how silly humans are sometimes. And then I had a thought, well, what if it was that light therapy? I mean, what if that had something to do with it? Then as a scientist, which I don't really claim totally, but a little bit, in understanding human, you're right, it should be repeatable. So I went back to the office. I put the face mask on. I, hit the button. I don't remember what setting it was on. I'm not sure that it made any difference one way or the other. And I've been able to sing ever since. And that is really what had me buy my first system and then buy the second one. And then, on and on. It's been, 15 years or so. So, yeah.
Ginger Bowler has a doctorate in energy medicine and is a certified light therapy instructor, biofeedback instructor, and co-founder of the Light Energy Training Seminars certification program. You can send us an email with your questions and comments to podcast@letskeepitlight.com, and be sure to visit us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And remember, let's keep it light.